1982, I was up in North Norway with my ship HMS Ardent, where we were carrying out exercises close to Harstad, where I'm standing at the moment, just inside the Arctic Circle. When the exercises were complete, I wanted to lay a wreath on the spot where the previous HMS Ardent had been sunk in 1940, and I went there and laid the wreath, took a lot of photographs, and I wrote and sent the photographs to the captain of HMS Endurance, Captain Nick Barker, because his father had actually been the captain of the Ardent and was lost when it was sunk. Nine weeks later, Captain Nick Barker wrote to me saying that he had done the same for my ship, because my ship was lying at the bottom of Falklands Sound. This is the story of how the Navy came back from the brink, winning the Falkland War with huge ramifications politically, militarily, and internationally for decades to come. The run-up to the Falklands War was not a happy time for the Royal Navy. Money was tight, and with the logic of Britain's withdrawal from empire still working its way through, in 1981, the Defence Secretary, John Lott, announced the results of the Defence Review, which had dramatic consequences for the Royal Navy. When I was Defence Secretary, the naval budget, but that's the conventional budget without nuclear weapons, increased by £500 million. There were no financial cuts at all. That's a naval myth. But it is true that the naval programme that I inherited was hopelessly over-budgeted. The money was never going to be available to fund their ambitious forward programme, so that had to be adjusted. So I had a problem. I looked at the plans, the naval plans, with the central staffs, because it wasn't just me, it was the whole of the Ministry of Defence, and I saw that we were spending £70 million to modernise old frigates. So I scrapped the modernisation programme and switched the money to building new frigates, which was the Type 23. They cost about 120 million. And to keep old hulls in operation made no sense. The Navy was obsessed by numbers, but in fact we had too many old ships. We tragically lost 6 ships in the Falklands, against a brave, but in fact a Third World Air Force. God knows what would have actually happened if we'd come up against the Soviets, who had thousands of missiles, against the Argentines, who had 6 exocets. We had to improve the Navy's weapon systems, particularly the ship's air defences. They failed in the Falklands. So I cut the number of naval frigates back to 50 and switched the money to funding better weapon systems. When the outcome of the Lott Review was promulgated to the fleet, I cleared lower deck, the naval term for talking to all my ship's company gathered together, to tell them the bad news. I told my men that we had to make the best of a very bad job, but that what the government had failed to appreciate was the next war would not be against the Soviets, but somewhere unexpected in the world. We would put our lives on the line for Britain elsewhere. The Argentinian invasion of the Falkland Islands turned the Lott Review on its head. The recovery of the islands was only possible because the Royal Navy was structured as it was for global operations. Whilst all in Whitehall had given up hope, the First Sea Lord knew the Navy could recover the islands. Told Margaret Thatcher so, and the rest is history. One of the key ingredients for success was maritime air power. And I've come down here to the Royal Naval Air Station at Yeovilton, and I'm here to meet Lieutenant Commander Rachel Cunnell. Hello, Rachel. What have you been looking at going on here down at the airbase?
Well, this morning, sir, we've seen a Sea King from 845, part of the Commander Helicopter Force, preparing for operations. We saw a Lynx Mark 8 just behind that. There was a Wildcat preparing for its tests. and there was a Hawk detachment just back from Plymouth where it's been doing operations with ships at sea.
So Yeovil's is the home base for the Fleet Air Arm, Rachel, and in 1982, at the time of the Falklands War, what role did Yeovilton play?
Yeovilton played a key role in the conflict. By May 1982, we had 126 aircraft and 1,400 people deployed on ships supporting the operations.
And of course, the only thing we didn't have was airborne early warning. But scientists and the services worked flat out here, so by the end of the conflict, we actually had almost produced an airborne early warning helicopter.
Absolutely, sir, yeah.
I understand there's a memorial to the Falkland Islands on the other side of the base.
There is, sir, yeah.
Well, let's go over there, shall we?
Fabulous.
Thank you. Well, I've arrived at the Falklands Memorial. It's an avenue of trees, altogether 12 trees for the 12 people from the base who lost their lives. And I'm standing in front of the plaque with those names, and I can see straight away there are several from my ship: John Sefton, the pilot; Brian Murphy, the observer; Peter Bruard, who was one of the maintenance people, and also Alan McCauley, another maintenance man, and a couple of other names there, two of the pilots, of the Harrier pilots, who actually joined the Navy the same year as I did. So a very moving spot. And the Falklands War came out of the blue for the nation. The Argentinians invaded on the 2nd of April, but it was a very short and really very vicious campaign.
The men of the ship's company are lined on the deck on either side. I can see from here 4 of helicopters.
The First Sea Lord convinced Margaret Thatcher that we could retake them, and to the surprise of everyone, he said we can sail a fleet within 4 days to start trying to recover the islands, and everyone thought this was impossible. Superhuman efforts were undertaken by the Naval Supply and Transport Organisation and by others in the country, and sure enough, 4 days later, Invincible, Hermes, sailed, the carrier group, and the Falklands were 8,000 miles from the UK, an immense distance. And only really a navy that had planned to work globally could have done this, with all of the fleet train, all of the support. We had to mobilise 73 merchant ships, including the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. This group of ships finally was ready for operations, and we declared a total exclusion zone around the islands. And the first air battles actually started around the islands on the 1st of May. And many people had said that the Sea Harrier would not be capable of taking on modern land-based jets. But in those battles on that first day, the Sea Harriers proved that they were able to take on any of the jets that were land-based and actually win.
I'm not allowed to say how many planes joined the raid, but I counted them all out, and I counted them all back. Their pilots were unhurt, cheerful, and jubilant.
The decision was made that we would do an invasion on the western side of East Falkland in San Carlos Water. The invasion force went in on the 21st of May, and over the next 6 days or so, the thin grey line of warships and the Sea Harriers were defending the troops that were being landed ashore. And in that period, 5,000 troops were landed and 5,000 tons of stores for them to fight. And there was no loss to any of those troops or any of those stores. But the Navy took a real hammering. And on day one of the landings, 21st of May, my ship was based close to the shore in the big kelp beds. The charts were very poor to show what that depth of water was, so that I could actually bombard with my long-range gun the area around Goose Green to support a diversionary attack by special forces to confuse the Argentinians about where we were landing, and also to bombard the airfield to stop aircraft taking off. And then through the day we came under more and more extreme air attacks from the Argentinian mainland by their fast jets, and the Navy had not really had to face such attacks since the Battle of Crete in the Second World War. And damage was taken by ships like the Argonaut, and I took a series of bomb hits throughout the day. I finished supporting the diversionary raid on Goose Green. I was moved into the centre of the Sound to split air attacks from the south. I had more air attacks. I was hit down aft. I lost my Sea-Cat missile system. I lost my main gunnery system, and I progressively had more and more damage. And then finally, just before dark, I was hit by the last of a series of bombs that caused catastrophic damage and caused me to be in a sinking condition, and I had to give the order to abandon ship. It was a very hectic day, very hard fighting, and by the end of it, the Navy had held that line, and it continued to do that for another 6 days, but it meant that we'd established our troops ashore, and once we'd established our troops ashore, there was no doubt about the outcome and that we would win the war in the Falklands. Now, another person who had a different perspective on the Falklands War, indeed he was flying above it, is His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, who was flying a Sea King helicopter throughout the conflict.
I was airborne when Sheffield was hit. And in fact, I think that was the occasion that I was actually the decoy. But at the time that we were
Did you have extra radar reflectors or anything?
not at the time that we did it. We were just a straightforward aircraft. You'd go and sit out there at about 200 metres off the ship, at 40 feet in the harbour, and just stay there until we tell you to stop. Why are we doing that? Just go and do it. Nobody told us what we paid.
They haven't told you at that stage.
No, well, we knew roughly that it was something to do with decoying. We supposed, well, how is it going to marry? That's what it was. But Atlantic Conveyor was the one that struck me. We were airborne when she was hit. And I remember being ordered to climb from out of the dip to about 3,000 or 4,000 feet and to deploy chaff. Now, everybody was deploying chaff. And I remember the observer going, my God, I've lost complete control of the picture because he had no idea what it was. And it was one of the Type 21s who fired a chaff out of a gun. And that was the one that nearly took us out. But fortunately, at that precise moment, I realised that there was a slight bearing change. It must have gone into the clouds in front of us, what, about 300 or 400 yards, I suppose. That's about as close as I wish to come to being shot down. Thank you very much.
That was ambuscade. I'll tell the XCO that you almost shot you
Oh,
down.
how did you know it was ambuscade?
I know the ships were exactly there. When they
Oh,
were
right. Well, I didn't know exactly. I had no idea. And then we went straight down after the attack was over to go and start pulling people off of the forecastle.
And the Atlantic Conveyor was heavily on fire then.
She was on fire. We landed on the front end, and the chap opened the back door and went, anybody else? There's not a soul on the deck. So we looked around and said, well, they must have all been collected. So we left, and that was the point at which we started to have to go and pick people out of the water. War is a very interesting leveler of people, and it makes no difference what background you are. The only important aspect of operations is your ability to be able to operate the aircraft, and it's irrelevant who you are. And even to this day, I will say that it knocks some pretty sharp edges off me and a lot of my colleagues. I describe the Falklands to many people as 99% boredom and routine, and 1% absolute terror.
Navy walked past in 5 separate contingents, and right at the head of the first contingent, rightly so, strides the captain of HMS Ireland. When we saw Ireland,
The Falklands victory and the steady improvement in Britain's fortunes over the next couple of decades set the Royal Navy on a very different trajectory to that envisaged in the Lot Defence Review. Nevertheless, the Royal Navy has continued to face sustained pressure to the present day, and in the final programme, I'll explore how the Royal Navy faced the last 30 years and what the future might hold.
Britain at Sea was presented by Admiral Lord West, and the producer was Giles Edwards. A new dramatisation of Philip K. Dick's cult novel continues this weekend as part of